This true Sonic debate is not good. So recently on my Twitter timeline, there's been a little bit of an altercation or conflicting viewpoints on the topic of what exactly is a true Sonic. Now, these debates in some way, shape, or form have stemmed from the recent reveal of the Sonic 3 movie in Japan's financial numbers. I believe, off the top of my head, it produced about $180,000. For a comparison's sake, within, I believe, the first day of primarily being out within the big three, and by the big three I mean the Canada, US, and EU, it did about 65 million. So when you look at these numbers and you look at the pretty abysmal $180,000 that the movie produced in Japan, you kind of have to sit there and you kind of have to ask yourself, okay, well, what is the issue with Japan? Are they just not hashtag rocking with Sonic like us in the West are, among other things? But more importantly, I want to tie this back into the debate I've seen recently about the true Sonic. Now, I'm going to try to give you a very, very light recap. And in fact, I'm going to link it down below in the video some examples of the comparison you can see between the dialogue between the two, because truthfully, I believe that you can tell that there is a certain point, primarily with the introductions of the writers for Sonic Colors. I believe it's Pontiac and whatever his name is, Griffin. We don't care. But to give you a quick rundown, Sonic is inherently Japanese, right? I know I made a whole video talking about the black cultural influences in Sonic the Hedgehog, but let's not get anything misconstrued, miscalculated, mispronounced. Sonic is inherently a franchise created in Japan with the intent to sell. While yes, they did in fact design Sonic taking account of Western influences, right? It is primarily a Japanese franchise, so those ideas are primarily going to be experience, and they're going to have an effect on the stories that are being told. Now, in traditional story structures, we see a lot more differences when you compare Western media and traditional Japanese media, and something that I've always seen be applied to Sonic is that yes, he inherently has shonen ideals within him, right? Sonic is a character that is good. He doesn't really express emotions, whether that could be due to mandates or just overall. Sonic is most of the time a calm-headed, cool figure. He's as free as the wind. He loves adventure. Those are common character traits that are often associated with Sonic. Now, when we get things into the West, and primarily due to the localization, right, we see more traits. Sonic is a lot more cooler, edgier. He's in some ways he likes to drop a one-liner to it. Now, emphasis on a one-liner or two, because incidentally, after Sonic Colors, we see a lot more of Sonic free-flowing, right? It feels as if he's a lot more loose. He's kind of more arrogant. He's kind of a jerk. Straight up. I mean, look at some of the cutscenes in Sonic Colors. He tends to take credit for Tails' advancements and help, and primarily attempts to take credit for the freeing of the Wisps on the planet, when actually in the Japanese script, we see Sonic be a lot more admirable and a lot more affectionate towards Tails.
お前があれこれやってくれたおかげさ。
僕が？そうかな。確かに機械を改造してウィスプたちの言葉を分かるようにして話を聞いてたから、ソニックは行ったり来たりしなくて済んだけど、やっぱりソニックの方がすごいよ。
Thank you. どっちにしても俺たちは頑張ったわけだ。
With all the generators destroyed, we can blow this joint and head home. We did it, dude.
We? I don't remember you fighting off any insane robots.
True. Well, good job to you on inventing a translator that allowed us to speak to the aliens and figure out exactly what we needed to do so we weren't running around the park looking like idiots. Oh no, wait. That was me.
Good point. Either way, we can get out of this crazy place and go home.
Tails, things like that are completely character defining, right? They said the idea that, hey, the Sonic in the West is a lot more arrogant. He's cocky. And that later went down the line of, we see in the movie's portrayal of Sonic where he's a lot more quippy. He drops a lot more cultural references and stuff like that, almost as if he's Spider-Man. And let's make this very clear. Sonic was never Spider-Man. He loves to throw shit at your face, but only if you're a bad guy. And most of the time, he does it through character actions. We see it throughout the cutscene in Sonic CD, where he's just running around, being him, bouncing off the environment, truly embodying what Sonic is as a character, right? We see it again in Sonic Unleashed, where he's almost effortlessly taking on Eggman's army, and he's just styling on him. No talks, no nothing. He is entirely show. I'm gonna show you what I'm about. I don't need to tell you that, hey, I can handle you. I'm just gonna show it to you. As a fan of multiple media platforms, right? Anime, manga, comics, all that. Let's just say I've experienced a bad translation. Okay. There are a couple times where I've attempted to experience media and then been told that, hey, this is not how it is supposed to be in the original, right? One of the biggest examples, Dragon Ball Z, we often see it a lot, is the Western dub originally wanted Goku to appear more as like a heroic figure, a Superman like. That's where you see a lot of the comparisons between Goku and Superman, even though inherently Goku is primarily driven to get stronger. That is his main goal. He does not see himself as a hero of justice, as far as I remember, okay? And that's like coming from the Moro arc. When I think about the moment of him talking to Moro, I was like, hey, you know, you can train, you can get stronger. And Jacko's telling him, yo, you need to put him on ice. And Goku says, hold on. Okay, let's keep fighting, but I'm not gonna fight you as a galactic patrol person. No, I'm gonna fight you as an earthling. Okay, because that's who I am. I'm not a hero of justice. Now that change is really jarring to some Dragon Ball fans, that because they grew up with the Western release where Goku's heroism has been interjected in areas where it wasn't really always there. Goku beats up Frieza and he's like, yo, I'm about to bounce. I don't need no cathartic points. Like, hey, you got beat by me. I just proved that I could climb up to your level. Okay, now in the Funimation dub, when you see Goku claiming to be a hero of justice and all that, you think a hero of justice is just gonna leave somebody like that? No, and that creates issues. That creates quote unquote plot holes that are due to a bad translation. Now, for the most part, I hold the personal opinion that Sonic's translation was at least consistent. It was considerable, it was all right, it was decent, right? And it's not without its a couple errors or interpretations. Now, to be completely honest with you, translations have a big issue in the sense that you have to often fit and accurately depict what the characters are going to say. Now, in a video game format, things like translators notes are not exactly going to be available and like easy to incorporate in certain scenes, right? So that leads to certain dialogue having to be changed or certain references having to be changed for an American audience to understand that. Now, that is almost always goes down a slippery slope. We see things like in the Pokemon anime where Brock is talking about jelly donuts, and it's like, bro, you have mochi in your hands. Where I think it was rice balls, right? But things like that create inherent issues within the media franchise in and of itself. So we go back to that era. One of the prominent examples I think of that falls under that case is at the end of Sonic Adventure 2, where Sonic is having that conversation with Rouge in the arc, and right before he walks off screen in the Japanese script, he says adios, Shadow the Hedgehog, right? And in the American release, you know, they could have kept the line as is, but I think, funnily enough, you know, adios is Spanish for goodbye, and I guess to kind of pay tribute or whatever, they ended up changing the line to sayonara, which sayonara is a Japanese for goodbye, right? That things like that is like, okay, cool, because at least here in the Western world, you know, maybe at the time period it wasn't as true, but generally over time, Latin America and just in general Hispanic culture has grown a lot more. There's that aspect, but then there's also, hey, the case where we change a line or two. So in the cutscene, the famous one where Sonic and Shadow are going down the arc talking about, you know, how did you live, you hedgehog? Right, that whole sequence in the dub, there's one particular line where Sonic says, hey, I die hard. Now, that line is quite interesting because there's a cutscene later on in Sonic Heroes where Sonic and Shadow re-interact with each other, where in the Japanese script of Sonic Adventure 2, Shadow mentions that Sonic could maybe have survived due to his unbreakable will. Now, that exact line is brought up again in that game, Sonic Heroes, where Sonic attempts to apply. It's like, hey, maybe it's because of our unbreakable will that you and me, both hedgehogs, were able to survive. Now I'm paraphrasing because I don't have the scene on me right now, but things like that, that's writing, that's continuity, that's proper callbacks, okay? And in the Western release, Sonic attempts to drop that same line, but all that feeling, all that meaning is completely lost and thrown to the void because you wouldn't understand that that line was a callback to Sonic Adventure 2. Right? Things like that. In my opinion, if it was going to be a good translation, or to go a little bit above and beyond, I think while translating Sonic Heroes, they should have intentionally made Sonic drop the line of, hey, I guess it's like I said, we die, or I die hard, something along those lines to keep it consistent. Because then we run into that problem with whenever you're translating media, is that things have to be consistent. If you're going to make a deviation, you're going to have to make sure you continually hammer down on that deviation regardless of what it is that you're attempting to do with the story. So if Sonic makes another reference to a previous line in a previous game, you're gonna have to make sure that however you chose to interpret that line has to do or has to maintain consistent. That could be a problem whenever you involve different translations, different authors, different people in the studio cooking, right? It's not always going to be consistent, and that inherently has its own problems. Now, the 2000s era, all the way up until like about, what was the last major game? I said Black Knight, right? All of those games were primarily written in Japan. They were written start to finish. That's what it is. From that point onward, we have this issue of Poniak and Graph, which are notorious for the Sonic Colors era of writing all the way up until Ian Flynn got it back. And we see things like Baldy McNose here. No copyright law in the universe is going to stop me. Things like that, that quite frankly, as someone who grew up primarily within the Dark Age and the quote-unquote meta era, that meta era Sonic pissed me off as a kid. I was like, bro, you're doing too much. This what happened to be the chill dude? This is like, he think he's the class clown. It was like, hold on, Sonic was never the class clown. He was never like this. What the hell happened? And that could be, I believe, an attempt to aim at an even younger audience, but maybe it's because I just grew up out of it, but I wasn't even that old to be. But regardless, and moving all that aside, that idea, because from my understanding and from how it's always been, is that Sega of Japan, they write the script, and by write, or not the script, they write the plot. Think about it, how in Dragon Ball, right, Akira Toriyama primarily wrote the line. He was like, hey, Goku and friends, they're gonna be chilling at Bulma's birthday, Beerus is gonna show up, and you know, chaos ensues. They'll write the general outline, but it's up to the writers of the game to figure out, okay, well, how do we connect all these plot points together, right? How do we choose to incorporate these character traits, these character dynamics? That's what it comes down to, okay? And when we look at it through that Dragon Ball example, that's why we see certain things like, hey, the Goku decides to go Super Saiyan before then tapping into Super Saiyan Rose. While in the anime, he goes straight from his base form to Super Saiyan Rose. Things like that, certain deviations. Those are plot details, but then we can tie it back into dialogue, right? I mentioned earlier in the video, hey, Sonic used to be, or in this modern interpretation, he's a lot more of a dick. He's an asshole. He's a condescending loser. I'm saying loser because he's still cool, but at least from that era of 2010 to 2017, that was the main Sonic interpretation that was brought upon by the West, right? Ian Flynn is the main dude putting the pieces together, right? He is being given the pieces by Sega of Japan and then told, make a puzzle. So that's what he does. He makes the pieces and he puts them, or he doesn't make the pieces. I keep saying make the pieces, but you get the analogy. Ian Flynn puts the pieces together to create the story, the dialogue, right? The character interactions, stuff like that. A screenwriter, if you will, right? You see, Grinolin can come up with the concept, the movie, have the direction, but then how are you gonna get from point A to point B within the story? Where you're gonna have screenwriters come on and they're gonna write the movie out. And that's what Ian Flynn primarily does, is that he is the scenario writer. He writes the dialogue between all the characters. The main thing that's stringing all the plot pieces together. You see it again in Sonic X Shadow Generations when he wrote Shadow Story, when he did the rewrite for that game, right? Those are all now Western ideologies and Western ways of creating stories, and all that now having to be retranslated back to the traditional Japanese audience. And to some people, they see that as a bastardization, abandonment of the original ideals of Sonic. And for the longest time, I kind of looked at them and I was like, all right, you're doing too much, until I had to experience the Sonic Colors dub. Now, I'm gonna keep it real with you. This whole JP versus American Sonic ideologies, all that is cool and stuff, but it isn't gonna change the mere fact that a lot of the 2010s game stories were abysmal. Sonic Color story is so one note, whatever, it doesn't matter. Even you could put the whole game in Japanese and I could look at the original script and I'm still gonna come to the conclusion of like, yeah, that game story is a big nothing burger. Same thing with Sonic Lost World. That game story is whatever. Now it is a lot more palatable, it is a lot more experienced. There are things that can make the writing better, and I can understand people who come to the conclusion of, hey, I like this story even more because I was able to experience it through the Japanese script. But for me personally, whether I'm playing that game dubbed or sub, I don't give a damn. Sonic Forces, no matter how you slice it, is still a bad story. I don't care. What no dialogue change is gonna fix that, because the issues with those kind of stories is that the structure is foundational. Less so with Sonic Colors, because that isn't meant to be a big grandiose story. But for the other two, I think my example kind of falls into that category. Now, with that being identified, what is True Sonic? Well, True Sonic would just be inherently the Japanese script. That is the True Sonic, but True Sonic isn't why the series was able to survive. Because you got to keep in mind all those deviations, all the big grandiose changes and stuff like that. I fully believe that if Sean Schemmel was not casted as Goku, in that kind of sense, Dragon Ball would nowhere be near as popular, at least in America, right? And I guess in the EU, whatever. But the people who grew up on Sean Schemmel love him so much. And even regardless, right, though those translations, even though they were mistranslations, they were primarily made to cater and garner a different kind of audience. The fact of the matter is, no matter how good JP Sonic is and JP Scripts is, his games have almost always past Sonic Adventure 2 underperformed in Japan. Straight up, with the exception of Sonic Frontiers, the drought period, now typically that same period was when the games were going down, but overall, JP Sonic was flipping burgers at McDonald's in comparison, okay? And it is a little bit disheartening, especially as someone who believes that, hey, there is merit to be there. Hey, these JP scripts can do a lot of heavy lifting for the story. Now, keep in mind, I'm going to take that point with a grain of salt, because primarily my main thing with Sonic games has always been, is the level design good? Or actually, the most important thing is gameplay good, and then is the level design good, and then, you know, the story can be good. But it doesn't matter, because I'm playing these games for gameplay first and foremost. But in that kind of worldview, what is the grandiose plan? Okay, because Sega has said on numerous occasions that we want Sonic to be as big as Mario. We want to be right next to Nintendo at the table. And my question to them is, how can you expect to be at the table with Nintendo if you can't even lift a finger? You're not even standing next to Mario on the podium. You're not even in the room where they're giving the awards. You're one of the waiters at the helping setting the tables, okay? How are they gonna get to that point if they're not able to captivate their own Japanese or their own home country territory, okay? And it is gonna be a little bit weird, because truthfully, I believe Sonic Frontiers was a game that was made with the intent to help garner some of the Japanese audience. We see it in the open world design, that Japan loves that stuff, you know, the RPG elements being baked back into it. Now, I'm trying to say this as like a generalization, not like not like a stereotypical thing, but typically those big adventurous games do a whole lot better in Japan, just in general. And truthfully, it's shown in the reception and the purchasement of Sonic Frontiers over in Japan. Above all else, that game was a success. Now, should Sonic Team pivot to focusing more on bolstering their Japanese audience? Yes, but at the same time, that comes with unprecedented risk, because you don't know if you hyperfixate on making a good product that's going to perform well in Japan. Because quite frankly, I don't believe in the belief that good games will do great just by being good, because there are too many cases, too many examples of good games, right, in quotation marks, completely flopping. And that's due to a multitude of issues, whether it be bad marketing, this and that. And I think as a Westerner myself, I don't think I can properly go in there and try to articulate and explain away why, oh, this is why the marketing sucks in Japan, this is that. That's not something that I'm quite equipped to do right now. But if anything, I understand the sentiment and disappointment. Now, I enjoyed the Sonic movies. Really enjoyed Sonic Movie 3, but even I can admit that, hey, sometimes it feels as if this interpretation of Sonic is completely ignoring core facets of his character. It seems that they are fixated and kind of harkening back and taking that Sonic, and he feels like an evolution of the American ideology of Sonic, in the sense of, like, you compare him to like the Archie comics and animated series and all that, because Japan didn't get any of that. They had Sonic X. Yeah, they didn't have Sat AM. They didn't have the Adventures of Sonic the Hedgehog. They didn't boom, like none of those were made over there with them in mind. And from what I understand, Sonic X even underperformed out there, to the point where the main way the Japanese folk were able to experience the story was through DVD releases, up until in 2020, where the Metarex Saga, the apparent only good one, I haven't watched Sonic X in years, but that one was able to be streamed on, like, you know, major broadcast television. But regardless, I'm cycling and I'm repeating points, but the main talking point that I'm making in this video is that truthfully, the true, authentic, genuine article, Sonic, is going to be found in the Japanese script. With that in mind, it's perfectly okay if you prefer the other scripts, the other interpretations of Sonic, because Lord believes me when I say I I love Jason Griffith too much. Now that's not a shame on Sonic's current VA in Japan, because after listening to some of his lines and being able to experience some of the stories through his performance, along with the entire JP voice cast, listen, is there anything to give Japan credit for is that they love to make sure they got their VAs, and the VAs love the characters and they're able to play them for a long time. We don't see a lot of the recasting issues, okay? Sonic's Japanese VA has played him since 1998 or 99. I can't say that for anybody in the West, okay? The closest one we got right now is Roger Craig Smith, but he only started in 2010. But regardless, that's the video. That's my take. Hopefully, this one doesn't flop, because I'm scared of uploading because I don't want to flop again. But regardless, this has been Malcome Xnox, and we out of here. Chain chomp, no young.